A disgraced police officer must confront his past when he saves the woman he wrongfully helped fire, exposing the lies that ruined her life. As old wounds reopen, the price of forgiveness becomes dangerously unclear. But before we start, if you guys like this story, please comment below and subscribe to Story Storer. Please hit the bell icon. Thank you. The screams echoed down the dimly lit hallway, piercing the tense silence that gripped the apartment complex. Officer Damian Wright's boots slammed against the floor as he rushed up the stairs, his mind racing. The dispatch call had been clear. Domestic disturbance, possible weapon involved, female in distress. But what froze him in his tracks was the name attached to the address: Jasmine Walker. He reached the door and hesitated, glancing at the number again. The woman who had once stood at the other side of his office, pleading for a fair chance after being fired from her job, now screamed for help. Her? His pulse quickened as anger and guilt tangled inside him, the weight of the past threatening to drag him under. He slammed his fist against the door, forcing it open. The sight that met him was chaos. A man towering over her, his hand raised like a battering ram, preparing to strike. Jasmine was backed into a corner, her face bruised, eyes wild with fear. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she held up a small, trembling hand. Without thinking, Damian lunged forward, grabbing the man by the wrist and twisting it until he dropped the weapon. A metal wrench. "Stay down," Damian barked, his voice a mix of authority and fear. The man tried to fight back, but the officer was relentless, his training kicking in as he subdued the threat with precision. The struggle didn't last long, but every second felt like a lifetime. Damian's eyes never left Jasmine as he forced the man onto the ground, handcuffing him with a practiced motion. "Jasmine," he breathed, his voice softer now, filled with something he hadn't expected, concern. She didn't answer at first, just shook her head, refusing to look up. Her clothes were torn, her hair disheveled, but it was her eyes that haunted him. The same eyes he had seen years ago when she stood before him, begging for her job back. Damian had never been one to question authority, not at the beginning. When he first joined the force, he believed the badge was a shield of truth. But everything shifted the day Jasmine Walker walked into his office. Jasmine, an outspoken, passionate woman of color, had been employed at a high-profile law firm, where she had built a name for herself. Then a scandal erupted. Allegations surfaced about a mistake she had made on a high-stakes case, a mistake that at first glance seemed undeniable. The evidence was damning, and yet Damian never truly believed it. But he'd been told to act. "Just sign the papers right, it's better for everyone," his superior had said. But that wasn't all. It was the way Jasmine's life unraveled afterward that stayed with him. The firing, the public shaming, the desperate job search, the isolation. He watched it from the sidelines, powerless, yet somehow complicit. He hadn't been able to stand up for her then, even when he knew the truth was muddied. The case was quietly swept under the rug. Jasmine was left to pick up the pieces, and Damian buried his guilt in his work. He tried to forget, but he couldn't. The years passed, and Damian moved on with his life. But Jasmine was a ghost, always lurking in the back of his mind. He could see her face every time he closed his eyes, hear her pleading words echo in his head. She was never really gone. Then, one day, his path crossed with hers again, though it didn't happen the way he thought it would. It was a routine day on patrol when he spotted a familiar face in a protest crowd. She was there, standing tall, leading a group of activists advocating for workplace equality. But she wasn't the woman he remembered, broken and beaten down. She was strong, unwavering, fighting for something much bigger than herself. He hadn't known she'd found a voice again. She was fighting for people like her, for justice, though it wasn't the kind of justice she'd ever found. Damien tried to approach her. He needed to apologize, to admit his wrongs. But Jasmine wouldn't even look at him. Her eyes, once filled with hope, were now filled with contempt. The next encounter came in the form of a routine call, a domestic dispute. When he entered the building, he didn't know what to expect until he saw the name on the address. Jasmine. At first, Damien couldn't believe it. Was this fate? Or a twisted joke? Had the world conspired to throw him back into her life at the lowest point imaginable? When he entered the apartment, everything around him seemed to slow down. The man with the wrench loomed over Jasmine. The years of pain, betrayal, and unspoken truths between them hung in the air like a thick fog. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think about his past mistakes. He just acted because, for once, his badge wasn't the thing that defined him. It was his humanity. Jasmine didn't even seem surprised when Damien subdued the attacker. Her eyes met his with an icy recognition. "You?" she said, her voice filled with disdain. "I didn't expect you to save me." Damien's chest tightened as she stood up, brushing herself off. She didn't seem to care about the man who had tried to kill her. She didn't even care that he had saved her life. "You're the one who ruined me," she added, her tone flat and unforgiving. "And now you think you can undo it with a hero moment? You don't get to play the savior?" Damien wanted to explain, to apologize, but the words stuck in his throat. The weight of what he had done hung over him like a shadow. "You fired me, Damien," Jasmine spat. "You didn't care about the truth. You didn't care about the woman standing in front of you. You cared about your job, your career, and now here you are. The man who ruined me, trying to fix it. It's too late." As the backup officers arrived and took the man away, Jasmine refused medical attention, her pride holding her back from any sign of weakness. She wasn't the woman Damien remembered anymore. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, from the wreckage he'd helped cause. But as the officers left, she turned back to him, her face expressionless. "I'm done with you," she said. "You can walk away and pretend this never happened, or you can face the truth." Damien felt the weight of her words like a stone in his chest. Was she right? Was he just another cog in a broken system, pretending to care for those he had failed? "Jasmine," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I've been sorry for years." She looked at him, her eyes searching for something in his gaze. But there was nothing left to find. "Sorry doesn't fix lives, Damien." "It doesn't fix me." Damien couldn't sleep. The weight of Jasmine's words pressed against him, heavier than any physical burden he'd ever known. He had saved her life that night, but it felt hollow. No amount of heroics could erase the years of his inaction, the way he'd stood by while her life crumbled because of a lie he chose to believe. Days passed, and he replayed their encounter in his mind. Jasmine's cold dismissal of his apology had cut deeper than the wounds of the fight. She was right. Sorry didn't fix anything. The truth was, Damien hadn't just failed her once, he had failed her every day since. But then, a realization struck him. He could change. He didn't need to fix the past. All he could do was move forward, atone through actions, and never again let his duty blind him to the truth. He couldn't undo the damage, but maybe, just maybe, he could become someone worth trusting again. The phone call came months later, long after the police report had been filed, and the case had faded into the background. Damien had kept his distance from Jasmine as she had demanded. But this time, when he picked up the phone, it wasn't the cold voice of a stranger on the other end. It was Jasmine. "I'm starting over," she said, "not because of you, but despite you." Damien's heart swelled with a mix of guilt and relief. She was still standing, still fighting, and though he would never be able to take back the past, he realized that sometimes redemption wasn't about undoing the wrongs. It was about allowing someone the chance to move on, to grow, and to find peace, whether or not you were part of that journey.